time to attend. Before we start the meeting, I have to make several announcements, which I'm going to go through now. And those are the emergency evacuation procedures. In the case of a fire, a bell will ring continuously. If this occurs, please leave the building immediately following the green fire exit signs out to the assembly point, which is by the War Memorial in Duke Street. If anyone requires assistance, please let me know. Lifts should not be used. Please remain at the assembly point and do not attempt to return into the building until you have been advised that it is safe to do so. The toilets are situated up the landing at the top of the main staircase and on the ground floor in the customer services area. Please could you turn your mobile phones either off or to silent, please? Filming of this meeting. Anyone attending this meeting is entitled to film it, but I should point out that only the councillors, officers and anyone sitting around these tables may be filmed. Members of the public should not be filmed, so please ensure that their cameras are pointed only in this direction. This meeting is also being broadcast via YouTube and recorded. There is now a matter that hasn't been published on the agenda, but Councillor Ian Wright died quite suddenly a short while ago. His funeral was today, and I think this is the first meeting since his funeral. And I would just like to ask everyone just to observe a minute's silence in remembrance of him. I think he served for about 20 years, and I think it would just be fitting as a mark of respect. So if you don't mind, we'll just have a minute's silence for Ian. Thank you very much. Thank you. Moving to the agenda. Apologies for absence and substitutions.
Thank you, Chair. We have received apologies from Councillor Canning and Councillor Deakin. Councillor Whitehead and Councillor Trong will be substituting in their place respectively. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have the minutes from the meeting held on the 14th of October to consider. Can we agree that they are an accurate reflection of the meeting that was held? Agreed. Thank you. Decision and action sheet to be considered from the previous meeting on the 14th. I think we can note those. And the fifth item, declaration of interests. All members are reminded that they must disclose any interest they know they have in terms of the business on the meeting's agenda, and that they must do so at this point on the agenda or as soon as they become aware of the interest. If the interest is a disclosable pecuniary interest, they are also obliged to notify the monitoring officer within 28 days of the meeting. Are there any declarations to be made? Take that as a no. We'll now move to public question time. Can I just remind those that are actually going, I think we have 2 public questions, that you have 2 minutes to ask your question. So if the first person would please come forward to ask their question. No, I don't think the microphone is on. So we'll stop the clock now and help you to get the microphone in.
Perfect, thank you. Good evening. How are Chelmsford City Council dealing with green issues across the whole of CCC? On one hand, you have converted a brownfield site to open space and are now intending to make it a nature reserve, whilst at the same time are intent on building over 4,000 houses on a greenfield site that will result in the loss of agricultural land and destroy natural habitats and the intrinsic beauty of the area forever. Is your decision-making politically motivated? It would seem that in many areas, it's where the Liberal voters live that affects how the council operates. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson, I don't know if you want to answer that question.
I'm very happy to, and isn't it fortunate that I'm here?
Yes.
And the local plan process is an extensive process that we've been going through for a very long time. We have, as we're going to talk about probably a bit later, we have a housing crisis. The whole country, not just Chelmsford. We have to build thousands of houses, and we can only put them on places which have been submitted in the call for sites. We had twice as many sites submitted for house building to deliver twice as many sites that would deliver twice as many houses as we needed. So we had to draw up a short list of sites, and there is a comprehensive evaluation process that we've gone through to come to that decision. And as I said at Policy Board some months ago, not only have we gone through that process and arrived at the view that that's the best place, so you didn't mention it, but I assume you're talking about Hammond's Farm. We have listened to many of the comments that have been made, and as you'll see when we get to Policy Board, some of those comments have been taken on board and adjustments proposed. But at the end of the day, we have to build not just 4,000 houses. We need to build the new target for us from the government is 1,406 homes a year over the next 15 years. Hammond's Farm, with the extra infrastructure proposals that have come forward from the developer, represents one of the most sustainable sites that we can go for. We can't, unfortunately, extend the Garden Community site near the station because the gravel has not been extracted from it, so it can't be built on. And that was another alternative that was considered but had to be rejected. So there are not enough brownfield sites to build houses on. We should prioritise brownfield sites, and we are, but they are very expensive to develop. We will be bringing forward proposals for what's known as the gasworks or waterside. We will be bringing proposals forward for that in the next few months, which could deliver around about 1,000 homes. But there isn't enough brownfield sites, so we have to build homes on greenfield sites somewhere, and Hammond's Farm is, of all the possible sites, the most sustainable.
Thank you. I think we have a second question. Can I just remind you that you have 2 minutes to ask the question? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mark Springett. I live in Moulton Lodge. The rationale for the call-in provided in a written request to the Director of Connected Chelmsford on the 10th of October is incorrect. John Shannon Playingfield is not a designated brownfield site. It's not on the register.
You have had 2 minutes. Have you got much more you want to? Can you round up? Thank you for making that point, and I think you have a point, but I think that will be covered very much so in the meeting, and that there is a wider issue here about the context of why we're doing this. And I think there is nothing in the papers that we have produced to suggest that the whole of John Shannon will be lost if any change in the motion is made. I think this is a debate, and I think that would become clear during the course of this conversation that we're going to have once we've had the experts speak. So thank you very much for your question. What I'd like to do now is explain the position for how we manage this call-in. And we start the proceedings where I want to make and remind everyone that overview and scrutiny processes, which would include in this call-in, should remain open and apolitical. And we are only here to question the policy-making process leading up to the decision made by Cabinet regarding the declaration of John Shannon Field as a local nature reserve. Whilst overview and scrutiny members are able to exercise the right to call in Cabinet decisions, this should not be viewed as a substitute for early involvement in the decision-making process or be seen as a party political tool. I stress the importance of members having an independent mindset throughout this process. As the Chair of Overview and Scrutiny, I will lead this meeting to ensure that members are heard fairly and to maintain the independence of this committee. As members would have noticed, we have contributors present both from outside and inside the Council to support us with the call-in. They are here to provide expert knowledge and to answer any questions posed to them relevant to the decisions in question. I would also like to take this opportunity to run through the procedures as highlighted on the cover of the report for this call-in. The call-in arrangements will be as follows. First, as Chair, I will explain the reasons for the call-in. Secondly, Councillor Moore, as Cabinet member responsible for the matter called in, will state the reasons on why the decision was made. Thirdly, I will then invite Keith Nicholson and Jeremy Potter to answer questions from the Chair to clarify certain points. Councillor Moore's contributors will then have the opportunity to present their information supporting the decision. Finally, members will be invited to ask questions to Councillor Moore, officers and other contributors present. A general discussion by the committee members would then commence before making the decision. As per the report, the committee will decide whether it supports the Cabinet decision. Otherwise, the Cabinet can decide that the decision should need to be referred back to Cabinet due to the following reasons. It was unreasonable, based on incorrect information, that it did not take into account information that should have been considered, or that the decision is faulty in some other way. So that's the order in which we will run through this meeting. So I will commence by explaining the rationale for the call-in. And this is that it is about the strategic concept and context for the proposal which seeks to change what was previously a designated brownfield site, a site favoured for development, into a nature reserve, without appropriate reassurances about the impact on the Council's budgets and other urgent priorities such as affordable housing. Prior to this proposal, on the 8th of the 10th, 24, Cabinet was made aware of the significant issues facing Chelmsford City Council and its ability to balance future budgets. That was item 6.1. Much of the increase in spend was attributed to the lack of affordable housing and the need for the council to subsidise accommodation for the homeless. There is a gap between government grant provision and the increase in rents and demand for housing. This was described as a housing crisis, and I think Councillor Robinson has again referred to that this evening. It was made clear that the City Council needed to urgently address this shortfall. The predictions before the budget were of a budget gap of an estimated 4 million in 2025-26, rising to a shortfall of 13.3 million across a 5-year period. It was also made clear that the budget situation could result in increased charges and the potential for a reduction in council services for all residents. And when we say all residents, that's 183,000 people. So this affects a much wider perspective than just the area that we're talking about and what we might or may not be able to do. In effect, any decision making that impacts on the core issues will have a direct impact on all the residents and how their money is being spent. So that was the rationale for the call-in. So I think what we'll now do is move to Councillor Moore, who is going to present on the case that was made. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members and members of the public. It's good to see so many of you here. I'm Councillor Rose Moore, Cabinet Member for Greener and Safer Chelmsford, and I have oversight of parks and green spaces. I also have oversight of planning policy. I have a particular interest in this area, as it's why I stood for election, because I didn't feel enough was being done to address the challenge of climate change and biodiversity loss, which is why I'm so honoured to be speaking to you this evening. So this site is known as John Shannon Field now in Molsham Lodge. A brief timeline, it's undeveloped in 1874, and then through the centuries it was used notably in the mid-50s as a landfill site for domestic and commercial wastes. It was also labelled as a disused gravel pit in the late 1960s, and the site was infilled slightly in the early 70s because of a slight slope that had developed and was top covered. Then in 1974, it began to be used for informal recreation, and the pavilion and other buildings outlined are located in the southeastern corner of the site. Anecdotal evidence too that an explosion may have occurred due to methane pockets at some point, and there have been other additional structures within the existing footprints of buildings. So a point of clarification, this doesn't sound like a rich site, it sounds like it could be a brownfield site, but it is not. The area is not designated as brownfield, it is designated as public open space in the local plan. The background to that is that in early 2019, the local plan was in a drafting phase, and it was then referred to as John Shannon Playing Fields. The land was proposed as a potential development site in the then Conservative administration's local plan draft. The 2019 Liberal Democrat manifesto included a pledge to take the John Shannon Field out of the draft local plan. And accordingly, when the Liberal Democrats did come into administration in July 2019, that pledge was honoured and John Shannon Field was removed from the draft local plan. There's also been a claim that the designation of this green space as a local nature reserve might reduce the land value and the ability of the council to borrow money in the future. Our finance team have confirmed that's not the case. Councils are not allowed to offer assets they own as security for loans, and the use or designation of the site as a local nature reserve therefore has no impact on the ability of the council to obtain loans or to raise funds in the future. I wanted to share that detail with you before I go on to explain what is a local nature reserve. Well, LNRs, or local nature reserves, are a statutory designation which is made under Section 21 of the National Parks and Access to the Countryside Act of 1949 by principal local authorities. Now, parish and town councils can also declare LNRs, but they must have the powers to do so delegated to them by the principal local authority. Local nature reserves are for people and wildlife. They are places with wildlife or geological features that are of special interest locally. They offer people opportunities to study or learn about nature, or simply to enjoy it. They range from windswept coastal headlands, ancient woodlands, flower-rich meadows, to former inner-city railways, long-abandoned landfill sites, and industrial areas that are now recolonised by wildlife. Even school rooftops have been designated. They are an impressive natural resource, which makes an important contribution to our biodiversity. This status from the government's own website and the description aligns fully with our principles and priorities as a Liberal Democrat administration, and that is why the designation of John Shennan Field as a local nature reserve is appropriate and, as I will outline in more detail shortly, reflects core policies of this administration. The policies that we make inform and shape our actions. And through our declaration of a climate and ecological emergency on the 16th of July 2019 and the associated action plan. In that, we pledged to undertake a greening programme to significantly increase the amount of woodland and the proportion of tree cover in Chelmsford, and to implement measures to improve the green infrastructure of our city and our district, protecting and expanding natural habitats and increasing biodiversity. We also pledged to improve the environmental quality, attractiveness and recreational potential of our public spaces, rivers and waterways, and associated green corridors in our city centre and the surrounding areas. The Council's Green Infrastructure Plan is also an integral element of our local plan to 2041, and its value goes beyond recreation. It is vital for fostering biodiversity, to improve air quality and to provide a safe haven for local wildlife. Establishing it as a nature reserve would therefore be a significant step towards protecting and enhancing this unique community asset for generations to come. The thousands of woodland whips establishing within John Shennan Field, many of those planted and tended by Parks volunteers and local residents, are surely testament to our commitment to create a greener, healthier future for all of our residents. It is the threat of a significant deficit of open space that is pertinent here, and a key reason for protecting John Shennan Field in its entirety as public open space, in addition to declaring it as a local nature reserve. Our policy for the creation and management of species-rich grasslands stipulates that we will, wherever possible, create space for nature to thrive in the heart of our communities. We certainly can and will continue to do that to benefit our Molsham Lodge residents. The declaration of the local nature reserve status safeguards our health and well-being too, into the future, but also our intrinsic quality of life right now. It cultivates a connection with wildness and the natural world we share. The addition of this new local nature reserve complements our existing ones, as well as Chelmsford's cultural strategy, where nature and urban green space has emerged as a key priority for all ages. The declaration of an LNR status also aligns with our vision of promoting sustainability and enhancing health and well-being at every opportunity, and every policy unlocks the potential to connect us and strengthen our priorities towards being a greener, fairer and more connected Chelmsford. Once we apply that criterion in our decision-making, we can achieve our wider objectives whilst honouring our strategic principles. So no more silos, no more boxes simply to be ticked. So the question for you members this evening is simple. Will the recommendation to Cabinet to declare John Shennan Field as a local nature reserve help to make Chelmsford greener, fairer and more connected? Because that is very much the question that was asked at Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Moving on to, can I ask Officer Jeremy Potter, in terms of brownfield site, how does a brownfield site be designated in terms of, is it intrinsically a brownfield site or is it reliant upon it being designated by the local council?
Thank you very much, Chair. Jeremy Potter, Spatial Planning Manager at the City Council. So brownfield sites are, or previously developed land, to give it its correct term, is defined within the National Planning Policy Framework. The site, the John Shennan Field site, would be classified as a greenfield site, not a brownfield site under that definition. Thank you.
Is that even though it was previously used as a rubbish tip and other things as described by Councillor Moore?
Yes, in the definition in the National Planning Policy Framework, it expressly excludes waste and mineral sites to be defined as previously developed sites.
Thank you for that clarification. Could I just ask Mr Nicholson, Keith Nicholson, to comment on when the status of a nature reserve is given to a particular area, does that preclude any other activity or any further designation taking place?
It doesn't preclude any appropriate use of the site. So one of the criteria for local nature reserve designation is for public access to be provided for at least a significant part of the site. Obviously, the recreational activities, use of for informal recreation. This particular site, there's already a play area on it. There's a half basketball court. So the status as a local nature reserve is more about the management of the habitat than it is about the use.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Councillor Moore, for the clarification on the ability to use the land in terms of any future borrowing that the council might take, which was not made clear at Cabinet and which was one of the sub-questions that was made. Because obviously facing such a financial difficulty, there are very concerns about locking something away that may be required to help us out for the future. Now, I think your contributors here, we would need perhaps to have their input now. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Julia Hodgkinson. I'm a member of Princes Road Allotment Association. I'm also a parks volunteer. We are located adjacent to John Shannon, and Oaklands Park is just over the road from us. We are 3 acres in size. We've been on the site for over 20 years. We have planted a native hedge around the perimeter of the site, which is just over half a mile in length. The plot provides food and shelter for a variety of wildlife, including sparrowhawks, who nest in Oaklands Park. And recently we had a family of buzzards visit us. We regard ourselves as a green corridor between John Shannon and Oaklands Park and would welcome a nature reserve which will provide plant and animal diversity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, as we've touched on already and has been on the question and now in this item, we have a housing crisis and a budget crisis. We do indeed. We have nearly 500 Chelmsford families who are in unsuitable temporary accommodation, and we need to house them in proper long-term accommodation. And we have a plan to do that. We secured planning permission a couple of weeks ago for another site, which we've discussed that at length as well. Those 6 small sites will deliver 58 social rent properties. We've just bought some land which will deliver another 18, and we have other plans for affordable housing of various kinds in different parts of our district. But the implication from the words that the Chair read out to justify the call-in by the Conservative group are that somehow building homes on John Shannon playing field would make that crisis disappear and would miraculously solve the housing and financial crisis. Well, that's, at the very best, that's actively misleading. And at worst, well, it's politicking. The fact is that building homes on that site would be A, very difficult, B, not very significant quantity, and most significantly, take away the only green space in Molsham Lodge. And as Councillor Moore has explained at some length, people are entitled, everyone is entitled to have access to public open space. The residents of the district who live in our lovely villages around the urban centre are fortunate to have access to wide open spaces, fields and footpaths through those areas. Residents of urban areas are just as entitled to have access to open space on their doorstep that they can walk to, take their dog to, take their children to. And as Councillor Moore said, and Mr Springett said from the gallery, there is no other large open space in Molsham Lodge. So this is not houses versus open space. The quantum of the two is just completely different. As I said, that even if you filled up John and Sean Shannon with houses, that would go nowhere near addressing our housing a crisis. And to sum up, I think both Councillor Moore and I would say residents of Molsham Lodge are entitled to have access to public open space, and that's what we want to do to protect it for future generations and give it a designation that ensures that its status is protected. And really that's our simple reason for proposing this. It's about protecting open space for residents to enjoy for the long term, and that's why we put it forward.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. I believe we have a member of the community, is there? Yes. Is there anybody else that's going to speak from your... That's completed. Right, thank you very much. Thank you for your contributions. I could take issue with some of the comments you've made, Councillor Robinson. I won't do that now because I think it will become clear when questions are asked that this isn't playing
on
politics.
A point of order, I think it would be going against the way you introduce the item if you keep jumping into the debate as you already have.
I don't think I have, but anyway, I just wanted to say this isn't about politics and it is about maybe having alternative ways to deal with things. We'll now ask committee members to ask questions of the contributors. So I'll open out the debate now, please. Councillor Dobson.
Thank you, Chair. I put together this question and I think Councillor Robinson has made various points which I was going to cover. But what I wanted to say was that in July 2019, the Cabinet member will no doubt remember myself and the late Ian Wright being the first members to congratulate her on the climate emergency declaration. And this is something I still fully support, and I do also support the Council's aims in this regard. I also understand the reasoning behind the removal then of the John Shannon land from the local plan. But no one could have imagined then the homeless crisis that we have 5 years later. And my question really is that why, when the council is facing a crisis situation, that this land, or at least part of it, is not being reconsidered for affordable housing. This administration, in dealing with an emergency situation, will need to be prepared to take some difficult and sometimes unpopular decisions. No options were given in the report for anything other than to declare an LNR or not to declare. The fact that it is in the local plan as open space would not be a barrier to development, as paragraph 2 of the NPPF states that planning decisions must be determined in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. And the obvious desperate need for land for such housing would definitely be a material consideration. So why is the administration not considering this, or even part of the land that would, whilst it wouldn't solve all of the housing crisis, and I get that with it's a much bigger picture, but it would help. And obviously the council is spending money on land and having to buy it outside of any land that it already owns for affordable housing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dobson. Well, I must say it's surely the deficit of open space that would be paramount in people's minds of the residents of Molsham Lodge in this case. They are so densely housed at the moment, and there's no option without actually impacting very negatively on people's lives. When we do have other sites. This is the whole purpose of the local plan, is that we are challenged as many local authorities are now with the housing numbers. Also the affordability of those homes. We know the quality of land that has been used as landfill can cost an enormous amount and is very volatile. And the provision of affordable homes on open space would, if I remember correctly, have to be 100% affordable housing. It would just, the first thing that would happen would that developers would claim viability issues and wouldn't deliver. We need to find sites that are adaptable and developable, that are not going to compromise the lives of our residents. That's that simple. And it's protected as open space for good reason.
And I'd just add that, yes, we have a housing crisis, and I've already addressed the question. I think it was a question. It sounded a bit like a speech, but I think it was a question, and I'd already answered that in what I said. We have to build 1,406 houses a year if the new target is adopted, brought in when the MPPF is finalised later this year. And as Councillor Moore said, even if we filled up John Shannon with houses, that would not help. It would help a little bit, but it would be a tiny drop in the ocean of what we need. But the bottom line is, we need to build communities, not just houses. We need to provide facilities for residents, including open space. We cannot, must not, should not just build housing estates because it's about the quality of life. And, it's not just about pounds and pence, it's about the quality of life that people enjoy. And everyone is entitled to have public open space on their doorstep that they can walk to.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Councillor Steele.
Thank you. I don't want you to misinterpret what's been said here. We're not asking about what you should do with the John Shannon field. We're asking about the merits and the logic of turning it into an L&R. We're not talking about what the other alternatives are. And my question is about, given that it's already a designated open space, then why limit your options for any future decisions by designating it as an L&R? Does it actually limit the options? Because actually it gets managed through the local plan anyway, but it does give you a restriction in as much as I think an L&R has to be managed more than an open space. So have you looked at the costs of managing it as an L&R? Have you estimated those? And how will you address those?
Thank you, Councillor Steele. There's no there's no increase in management costs for the land. It's been managed effectively as a local nature reserve for 10 years. Work began back in 2016 to enrich the land, to stabilise the soil by planting trees, and to naturalise the space. So it's been managed sympathetically. Possibly Mr Van Damme would be able to comment on the existing, pre-existing local nature reserves that we have in our urban area. So we have Admiral's Park, where a stretch is now confirmed as a local nature reserve. We have the Chelmsford Valley, the bunny walks leading into the centre of Chelmsford. And recently we've spotted otters coming back to the Chelmer because of these connected corridors that we are building. And also we have outlying nature reserves too. So Franklin Fields in South Woodham is a really beloved space for local residents, and it's about that community sense of having a destination. A local nature reserve means something to people rather than just a planning designation of open space. Valuable though open spaces are if they are managed sympathetically, but the costs are no materially higher, and I'm going to seek advice from Mr Nicholson and Mr Van Damme just to assure you that it's not a costly enterprise at all. It's just in the ballpark of our outgoings as a council in looking after our public open spaces for the benefit of all of our residents. Thank you.
So, just to put some flesh on that, the cost question 7, in the reasons for call-in, was actually covered in paragraph 36 of Appendix 3, and in fact the financial implications, were identified in the original Cabinet report. as well. So there are no financial implications, no additional costs for either managing the site as a local nature reserve or getting it to the state where it could be declared as a local nature reserve. I think the thing just to get clear in your mind is that the local nature reserve status is about the management of the habitat, is what I said earlier, and what you commonly find is that managing it in accordance with an agreed management plan as a local nature reserve has often got a lower cost than if you were maintaining it as a park, just because of the very nature of what you're doing there. So cost isn't an issue. If it helps, it costs around about £20,000 to maintain this site at the moment, annual costs, which is 32 pence per square metre per year. That will compare very favourably with the management costs of more formally laid out parks, I can assure you of that. So it's not a cost issue. It's not generating costs. If anything, it might be saving a bit of cost, but the costs are relatively modest for the size of land that we're talking about.
Are there any other questions for clarification?
Thank you, Chair. I've got in front of me here a Facebook post that was posted by a then councillor of a different party to mine a few days before the last local election, which says there are, and these are the words quoted, there are definitely no Conservative plans to sell or develop. So it's, I think the reason that there are a number of people who are in the public gallery tonight is because this call-in has provoked a degree of anxiety amongst residents that perhaps the past is trying to be reopened again, that something that has been settled in the local plan maybe isn't being directly challenged, but the threat of it being challenged and not being properly protected that's the reaction we've got here tonight. And that's the passion. Obviously, I'm the ward councillor, so I will naturally feel strongly about it. Knowing Molsham Lodge well now and its residents, you sometimes can get a narrative from some that it's a bit of a forgotten corner, that perhaps things like the buses don't stop as often as they used to, and there's not a police station, hasn't been a police station for ages, and the post office is shut and that sort of thing. So obviously I feel very strongly as the ward councillor about protecting all the infrastructure that's good, including the natural infrastructure of Molsham Lodge, and John Shenfield is absolutely central to that. And I guess my question here tonight, when we think about the mental health benefits, the environmental benefits of having this open space, is where, if this place is not properly protected, where do we expect, if there is another lockdown, where are these residents meant to go? Are they meant to get in a car? Are they meant to drive to Highlands Park or somewhere to walk their dog? If we don't protect this space for the residents, really, what have they got left?
Councillor Whitehead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There are a couple of points in the questions, and then I'll come back to the point that Councillor Thompson just made. But what we're trying to do this evening, and what we asked about in the questions, were other uses of part of the site, and that was mentioned earlier on too. I can assure you that there were originally, as you well know, plans to build some houses on it in our earlier plan, and those were taken out, which we accept and have not challenged. Nobody's intending to sell the site. I've seen all sorts of weird posts on social media saying just that sort of thing, really, which is perhaps why some of the residents are here. But that was never the intention, and remains quite the opposite to what we are suggesting this evening. The alternative uses that were put forward, I think, by Councillor Armstrong, who unfortunately can't be here tonight, is to use part of the site. For example, to put solar panels on part of the site, which would cover the point that Councillor Moore makes. It's all right to use Lord Rayleigh's farm or Hammond's farm or all the other farms to put solar panels. Not that they're my favourite subject, but nonetheless they are supposedly extremely green. And not to use an old quarry and rubbish tip for the same reasons. You could use 1/2 of it. I mean, it's 10 acres, isn't it? 10 football pitches at 4.5 hectares. If it was chopped in half, it would still be a very large open space. Equally, the point was made by the lady opposite that it's just across the road to Oaklands Park, which it jolly well is. And so you can't say there's nowhere nearby. It's certainly a very, very, very expensive conversion that's done over at Oaklands by us in the past to make it what it is. The tennis courts, the museum and so on are all there. But again, as I say, we're not trying to stop people walking their dogs up and down. Or allotments. I'm part of an allotment trustee that's been at an allotment site for 150 years, and we have 200 allotments, so believe me, I'm entirely in favour of allotments. What we were asking and what the questions were asking were, did you consider those? And if you did, could you tell us why they were rejected? That's the simple point of the whole meeting this evening. We've had lots of discussions, but what were the alternatives and why were they rejected? What were the alternatives for affordable housing? What were the alternatives for temporary housing? Now, as you know, we put in temporary housing, very popular in Beaches Road and Fox's Crescent, on those particular sites which were small and unused. You could certainly put that on a part of the site now, here, on the left-hand side, looking at it from the allotments, as it were. Again, it may be completely impractical. None of us are suggesting any of that. What we're doing here, and what we've done on Waterside and other things, is to say to the administration, tell us what the alternatives are, tell us why they've been rejected, and we will accept those things. That's all we're ever saying. We're not saying do away with all your dog walking parts. Of course not. Absolutely not. But what we're trying to say is we don't know the answer to all the various points that are made in the report that came to Cabinet in the first place. So I'm very happy for you to say why you wouldn't want to put solar panels in there, for example, or why you don't want to put temporary housing in there, because those are unanswered questions. They're on the list of questions that the chairman has already covered, really. So from that, it does seem odd to all of us that land was bought recently using precious capital, not revenue, of course not, but nonetheless, to find a site when we've actually got our own site. The question of viability, when it's your own land, that's a different matter because you can ask a developer to develop it and it's not a question of viability. So there are lots of alternatives. Maybe all of the alternatives I've just talked are a load of rubbish, and you can tell me that. I'm quite happy to be wrong on all of these points. It's just that if you don't consider all the options, how can you actually make a good decision for the benefit of all the residents? Certainly, yes, we are entirely concerned about the 450 people on this ever-increasing list. And the point was made by Councillor Dobson that those numbers weren't there 5 years ago. And, I mean, I know your second questioner, really, because he had equally a very important role in that area at the time as a councillor. But we're not against any of these things. We're certainly not against any of the green measures that you're suggesting. It's just a question of, do you toss a coin and say, oh, homeless, well, yeah, well, they'll come second to green, or do we say, oh, green's much more important than homeless? There is an alternative, which has been suggested by a number of people, which is to look twice at the whole thing and say, could we do both? If you can answer those questions, I think we'll have a very short meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Councillor Moore?
Councillor Whitehead, the land at John Shannon Field is designated as public open space. You'll know there are policy requirements that should any planning application come forward, very tight stipulations on what could or could not be put on that land. I don't see any greater advantage of developing that using solar panels than its use at the moment, which is as a public open space. And it's required, if you're going to look at the facts and the figures, It's required by the sheer number of people who make Molsham Lodge their home. Without it, as Councillor Thompson has said, they're a huge deficit, and I couldn't tolerate it. I'm sorry. We have other options. We have a planning process, and we are intent on providing affordable homes. And we're doing a lot more than I may say other authorities are to secure that, as you will probably hear at the 18th of November Overview and Scrutiny meeting when we have our annual housing report, which I'm delighted to be presenting. Well, then we will wait with bated breath for the report, and it may well be circulated to members of Overview and Scrutiny, although it won't be a public meeting. But I want to make the point, this is green, this is public open space, and it's been managed sensitively for 10 years in order to provide this green lung in the centre of what is a very densely populated area. So of course we've considered options, and the best option for the residents and for the people of Chelmsford is the sympathetic management of this space going forwards. And that's that, I'm afraid. I will hand over to Councillor Robinson, who will probably be more robust than I.
No, I should do my best not to. I am a little frustrated because I don't think Councillor Dobson or Whitehead actually listened to what we said earlier, because otherwise they wouldn't have asked their pre-prepared questions. Designation as a local nature reserve only stops it being developed for houses. It doesn't stop it, well actually it doesn't even stop it doing that. If you brought forward a planning application, it would just raise the bar slightly for considering a planning application. But actually there is nothing to stop anybody bringing forward a planning application to put houses there in future. It's not green belt in that sense. It's not just across the road from Oaklands Park, it's just across the second busiest road in Chelmsford from Oaklands Park. And they are different communities. Molsham Lodge is entitled to have its own public open space. And again, as Councillor Moore said earlier, in answer to your question about viability is an issue when we build houses, just the same as it is for private developers. The numbers are slightly different, but it's still a viability issue. And as Councillor Moore said, we were advised you can't build houses on it unless you excavated it first. And any builder, that's going to be very expensive, and the only way you recoup that kind of cost is by putting market housing that generates a profit to pay for those huge costs. Social housing is very expensive to build. It has to be subsidised. And as you know, it has to be subsidised normally from developer profit. So if you don't put market housing on the site, there is no profit to be made to subsidise the social housing, and it would be a very expensive site to put houses on. And so just for practical reasons, it wouldn't work as an affordable housing site. It might if you put very expensive houses on it that made a big profit, but we're not proposing that. So we have considered alternatives, and as I said, the housing is just not viable, and Councillor Moore addressed the solar panel point. There are other options for doing that. We've put solar panels on the roofs of most of the buildings that the council itself owns, and that is actually helping the council reduce its energy costs. So I think we've answered your points.
Sorry, so you didn't mention temporary housing in your responses.
Well, any kind of temporary housing is a different kind of social rent housing. I mean, there's still a cost to it, and in the cost of putting in temporary accommodation, you still have to put the utilities in, and that's often one of the expensive parts of putting housing in. So actually, putting modular homes, for example, on one or two sites that we've considered has actually turned out to be prohibitively expensive. It's actually cheaper to follow other routes, which we are doing, and we've already brought forward more plans for social housing. I'm sorry to be political, but we have brought forward more plans of social housing in our 5 years than you did in 16.
Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Any other questions for clarity here? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. You've mentioned about this land being designated as LNR being beneficial to those of Molsham Lodge as an open space. When we think about the wider community, is there enough in terms of parking spaces, and what are the plans for parking for the wider community to use it as an LNR, as an open space for all residents of Chelmsford, not just those that are local to it.
Sorry. Could you please, Mr Nicholson, perhaps, or Mr Van Damme, if with your experience of local nature reserves such as this one, what the implications might be for extra car parking requirements?
I think it's really simple. This is a local open space expected to be used by local people who are generally going to be walking, to it, exercising their dogs, walking to it. So the need for additional car parking, provision other than the car parking that's already on site is low. I mean, you're not creating, by managing it as a local nature reserve, as giving it a local nature reserve status, you're not creating a visitor attraction, expecting hordes of people to be coming, driving to it. It's not that. It's a local open space. I don't think parking is an issue. The issue with parking on John Shenfield is parents and alike dropping off children at the variety of schools. That's where the parking pressure is, not because it's stated as a local nature reserve.
Are there any other questions? Any comments anyone wants to make? Have we concluded the exchange that we need?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As a councillor for Goat Hall, I would like to point out that there is no open space in Goat Hall, and that our residents use John Shannon. We have Chelmsford Park, but that's quite a long way away, so it's incredibly important that we save spaces like this. We also have a lot of school children that in Goat Hall who walk down to Molsham schools, and as was mentioned just now, it's very important that school children come out of school and have a place to play and run around and a safe place. And so it's not just Molsham Lodge, it is for residents of Goat Hall as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we've had lots of conversations about the merits of the policy decision more generally, but I have some general questions, not to anyone in particular, about the merits of the call in itself, just in the sense that this isn't a surprise. I think we committed to making this a nature reserve during the election last year. Obviously, documents are published ahead of meetings, and I confess I haven't watched every cabinet meeting to know whether any of these questions have been asked before. But I ask why these questions couldn't have been raised earlier when this idea is not new. There was prior indication that it was going to happen. So just on the merits of asking the questions here rather than at cabinet, why did that happen there? And just on the other merits, I think, given that the Conservative members of this the council have run the council prior to this and have talked about this as part of planning proposals in the past, why aren't they aware of some of these these things anyway? It had been in the local plan, so there had been some consideration there. And just on a level that it's clearly too expensive to use in any proper way, and several other things that have been raised by members and contributors. Why do we need to leave the option open if there is clearly no other use for the land other than either as a public open space or some rather expensive private development? And in that case, I think it's perfectly acceptable that we make this policy decision that yes, we do in fact need this public space in Molsham Lodge. It is a severe public space deficit, so I think this meeting has made it more clear to me personally that this is needed, just in the sense that we need to protect it from private development in the future. Thank you.
Councillor Whitehead.
So can I raise a point of order on that? Many questions were asked at the last Cabinet meeting and Councillor Moore was unable to answer them and it was referred elsewhere. So we did ask those questions, which are the ones that are on here. I'm sorry, I'm not criticising. I'm simply saying that's, if you look at the video, you'll see that's what happened. And therefore, we're seeking further clarification, which is the point I made earlier. It's not about selling, it's not about politics, it's about why you've made the decision. You've explained it very helpfully this evening, and we'll make a decision shortly. No one's objecting to any of that at all. No one's trying to destroy the residents' habitat in any shape or form. All we've done is say to this committee, could we have more explanation of points so that we, simple people, I'm only a simple councillor, so I don't fully understand it all, can I actually know why the decision was made, and that's the real reason. As I say, I'm not criticising anybody here or anything at all. We were simply seeking clarification, and I'm very grateful for everybody here to have been given it this evening.
Of course, and I did say that I haven't watched every cabinet meeting that this has been brought up in any particular detail, just in the sense that this not only was brought to a cabinet meeting, but has been public knowledge that we considered to do this far in advance. So why were the questions not asked prior to that? But that's fine. Thank you.
I think also that we talked about the changing context of it, and in terms of what was in the original report and the impact it might have on the wider residents in terms of costs going forward, I accept that isn't the solution to all the housing problems. But I think there needs to be some transparency for people to understand the decisions that are made and how that might ultimately impact on them. So getting the clarification here tonight is what we're about. That's what's happened and that's why it was called in. That's where we were with it. Are there any other questions or comments that anyone wants to make?
If there are no further points, I'd like to propose that that the decision of Cabinet be upheld and that it remains it designated as a local nature reserve. If there's a seconder for that.
Okay, you've made the proposal. I think we need a show of hands, do we? So the proposal is that it goes forward as proposed. Show of hands for yes. Thank you. I think as that's carried, there's little point in going to the alternative. I don't think we have to do that. Sorry, those that are against. Okay, that's it. Then thank you very much. I think those that are abstaining. Okay, well, I think that concludes the business of this evening. Thank you very much for the input that's taken place. And I think that has helped clarify things, particularly if we go forward into what looks like going to be quite difficult times ahead in terms of budgets and everything else, for the public to understand why we make certain decisions that may well impact on all of them. Thank you very much indeed. Meeting is now closed.